The playboy heir who burned through a Gilded Age fortune. Reginald Claypoole Vanderbilt entered the world on January 14, 1880, in New York, at a moment when his family's name stood for almost unimaginable power. The Vanderbilts had risen from steamboats to dominate the railroads, with Cornelius the Commodore Vanderbilt turning a single ferry route into an empire that stretched across the continent. By the time Reginald was born, the dynasty's fortune was measured in the tens of millions, an amount so vast it seemed immune to the shocks of the outside world. Grand Central Depot bore the family crest, and Fifth Avenue glittered with Vanderbilt mansions, each one larger and more ornate than the last. The scale of their wealth shaped the very skyline of New York and dictated the rhythms of Gilded Age society. Reginald's arrival as the youngest son of Cornelius Vanderbilt II and Alice Claypoole Gwynn was more than a family milestone. It was another chapter in a legacy that had already outgrown any single generation. Yet beneath the marble and mahogany, the rules of inheritance and expectation pressed in, quietly defining who would steer the empire and who would be left to drift. In this world, birth was destiny, but destiny came with its own hidden costs. Reginald's path was set long before he could shape it himself. As the youngest son in a dynasty built on ambition, he was surrounded by reminders of what others expected from a Vanderbilt. His older brother, Cornelius III, moved through the world with a sense of duty, Yale degrees in hand, business interests lined up, every step mapped out by the family. Reginald, by contrast, was the classic spare, important enough to be watched, but never trusted with the controls. The journey began with private tutors, then the ritual march through St. Paul's School in New Hampshire, a place where the sons of America's elite learned the codes of their class. Groton followed, with its stone halls and strict headmasters promising to mold boys into leaders. The final stop was Yale, the family's preferred proving ground. But Reginald drifted through these institutions, never settling into the purpose they were supposed to provide. He left Yale after 2 years, his name still opening doors, but his future undefined. The irony was hard to miss. Surrounded by privilege, Reginald had access to the best education money could buy, yet none of it offered him a real role or reason to belong. While Cornelius III was being groomed to carry the Vanderbilt torch, Reginald was left to invent meaning for himself. In this vacuum, the trappings of wealth became a substitute for direction, a pattern that would haunt him for the rest of his life. September 1899 arrived with a funeral and a reckoning. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, the head of the family, died at just 55, and the question of what would become of his fortune landed squarely on the shoulders of his heirs. For Reginald, the answer came in the form of a trust, an arrangement as revealing as it was restrictive. His share, estimated at $25 million, was enormous by any standard, but the terms were clear. Reginald would receive income only, with no right to touch the principal, no voting power, and no say in the family's railroad empire. The message was unspoken but unmistakable. His father, wary of youthful impulse and perhaps already doubting his youngest son's judgment, built a wall around the money that could not be climbed. The trust was managed by appointed trustees, not by Reginald himself. Dividends and interest would flow to him regularly, enough to fund a lifestyle of privilege, but the core of the fortune remained out of reach. While his older brother Alfred received the lion's share and the authority to steer the family's business interests, Reginald was left with comfort but not control. The legal language of the will, though hidden in court files, echoed an old family anxiety that too much freedom, given too soon, could undo a dynasty. In the end, the trust was both a gift and a warning. It gave Reginald the means to live lavishly while quietly signaling that true confidence in his stewardship was lacking. The boundaries set in probate would shadow every decision he made, shaping a life spent searching for meaning within limits he could never escape. Behind the velvet curtains of New York's most exclusive clubs, Reginald Vanderbilt found a world that spoke to his restless hunger. The Canfield Club, run by Richard Canfield, the so-called Prince of Gamblers, was the epicenter of Gilded Age vice. Here, the city's elite gathered under crystal chandeliers, their laughter echoing off marble floors, while fortunes shifted hands in the hush of back rooms. For men like Reginald, the stakes were never just about money. The thrill was in the risk, the sense that a Vanderbilt could win or lose millions on the turn of a card and still walk out with his name intact. But the system was built to hide the damage. Canfield's operations ran on credit markers, IOUs quietly signed in the heat of the night, debts that grew in the shadows, invisible to the world outside. The phrase among regulars was, "Chandeliers upstairs, debts downstairs," a knowing nod to the double life of the city's most celebrated sons. Reginald's signature became a fixture in these ledgers, each marker a silent leak in the dam of his inheritance. The numbers were staggering, but the real danger was the illusion of endless supply. With an annual income that dwarfed most men's lifetime earnings, Reginald could indulge every impulse, never feeling the walls closing in. Yet with each wager, the fortune contracted, the trust's careful boundaries proving no match for the tidal pull of high society's temptations. In this world, discipline was the one thing money could not buy. Sandy Point Farm in Rhode Island offered Reginald Vanderbilt a world apart from the haze of New York's gambling rooms. Here, among the paddocks and stables, he built something real, a reputation as one of America's most respected horsemen. He didn't just bankroll the operation, he immersed himself in it, studying bloodlines, debating training regimens, and presiding over the farm's daily rhythms with a seriousness that surprised even longtime friends. In 1912, his thoroughbred won the Rhode Island Handicap, a victory celebrated in racing circles and reported in the sporting press. That same year, Reginald took on the presidency of the American Hackney Horse Society, lending his name and energy to a world that valued discipline, tradition, and craft. The Sandy Point community saw a different side of him, focused, knowledgeable, and generous with his time. Trainers and jockeys spoke of his keen eye for a promising colt and his willingness to invest in new breeding stock. Race programs from the era list his horses among the favorites, and his stables became a destination for anyone serious about equestrian sport. For a time, it seemed as though he had found the one arena where talent and effort could outshine the family name. Yet even here, the contrast lingered. The same man who could orchestrate a perfect season on the track remained unable to rein in the appetites that threatened everything else he touched. Historians studying the Vanderbilt dynasty point to the structure of Reginald's trust as a textbook example of the Gilded Age inheritance anxiety. Probate excerpts from Cornelius Vanderbilt II's estate lay out the income-only provisions, annual dividends, and interest, but not a dollar of principal could be touched. The legal phrasing, dry as it is, encodes a father's doubt in black and white. Estate ledgers from the early 1900s chart the steady flow of funds, quarterly disbursements, checks drawn to exclusive clubs, and the occasional spike for a new horse at Sandy Point Farm. These numbers reveal a pattern: steady income met by ever-increasing outflow. Sociologists examining the spare son problem find Reginald's case almost archetypal. Family records show his older brothers receiving not just larger shares, but active roles in managing the railroad empire. Reginald's position, wealthy yet sidelined, left him both spare and privileged and adrift. Letters exchanged between trainers and the Sandy Point stables reflect a different discipline. Detailed notes on bloodlines, breeding fees, and the logistics of moving horses between Rhode Island and New York. Here, Reginald's handwriting is precise, invested. Meanwhile, bills from Richard Canfield's clubs tell a darker story. Gambling IOUs, some signed with a flourish, others scrawled late at night, pile up in the Canfield ledgers. Each marker is a silent testament to the risks taken behind closed doors. Together, these documents and expert voices draw a timeline, one that overlays glamour with growing instability and places the evidence of collapse squarely in the record. Reginald Vanderbilt's first marriage unfolded beneath the watchful gaze of Newport and New York society. In April 1903, he wed Kathleen Nielsen, sometimes listed as Harriman, a match that seemed to promise stability and the union of two powerful families. The ceremony, attended by the era's most prominent names, was splashed across social columns, each detail scrutinized for hints of glamour or scandal. Their daughter, Kathleen, arrived just a year later, briefly anchoring the family in the rituals of privilege. Summers at the shore, winters in the city, a life mapped out by tradition. But behind the polished photographs, the marriage became a quiet battleground. Reginald's nights grew longer, his absences harder to explain. The same inheritance that bought a seat at every table also funded habits that eroded trust at home. Kathleen found herself isolated by the very name that was supposed to protect her, forced to maintain appearances, while rumors of her husband's gambling and drinking reached even the most discreet corners of society. Divorce, still rare among families of their stature, became unavoidable. In 1920, after 17 years, the union ended in court filings and whispered speculation, leaving their daughter to navigate a family divided by choices made behind closed doors. The Vanderbilt name looks glamorous in headlines, but it's brutal in private, especially when the cost is measured not in dollars, but in the quiet unraveling of a home. March 6, 1923, brought Reginald Vanderbilt back into the society columns, this time on the arm of Gloria Morgan. The wedding, held just 3 years after his first divorce, was less a quiet family affair than a public spectacle. Gloria was barely 20, strikingly beautiful, and nearly a generation younger than her new husband. So young, in fact, that she was closer in age to Reginald's eldest daughter than to Reginald himself. The press, always hungry for a Vanderbilt story, feasted on the whispers, old money, new bride, and the unmistakable scent of scandal. The marriage was hailed in some corners as a merger of fortunes, two storied names, Vanderbilt and Morgan, joined in an era that still worshipped such alliances. But the reality inside their Newport and New York homes was far less still. Reginald's drinking had worsened, and his reputation for wild nights and mounting debts was no longer just a private embarrassment, it was a matter of public record. Gloria, thrust into the role of society wife and soon-to-be mother, found herself isolated in a household already unraveling. On February 20, 1924, their daughter, Gloria Laura Vanderbilt, was born. Newspaper announcements celebrated the arrival of another Vanderbilt heir, but behind the headlines, the family's fortune and its stability were slipping away. The birth of an infant brought no pause to Reginald's decline. Instead, it added a new layer of tension, a child born into a world of privilege, but also into the shadow of a father whose excesses had begun to eclipse even the grandeur of his name. Within months, the future of both mother and daughter would be shaped not by the promise of their inheritance, but by the looming consequences of Reginald's choices. By the summer of 1925, the world inside Sandy Point Farm had grown hushed and heavy. Prohibition laws kept the rest of the country dry. But for men of Reginald Vanderbilt's standing, the flow of liquor never stopped. Bootleggers made their deliveries in the dead of night, unloading crates behind the stables, slipping away before dawn. Inside the main house, Reginald's drinking blurred the days together. His health faltered with each passing week. Doctors were called, but their visits brought little comfort. The diagnosis was whispered among staff and family. Cirrhosis, the silent price of years spent numbing disappointment with drink. The estate's grandeur offered no protection from the slow, public unraveling. In the mornings, trainers tended to the horses, while the master of the house remained behind drawn curtains. Letters from friends went unanswered. Even the trusted rhythm of the stills could not mask the sense of decline. Reginald was only 45, but the life had already drained from him. On September 4th, 1925, he died in his upstairs room, leaving behind a legacy measured not in triumphs, but in what had slipped away. The fortune that once promised security was now a shadow of itself. Of the $25 million he had inherited, only $5 million remained, locked in a trust for his widow and infant daughter. The rest had vanished into the night, scattered across gambling tables, lost to creditors, or poured out in glasses emptied long before dawn. The man who once seemed untouchable had destroyed himself in slow motion, and the consequences of that destruction were only beginning to unfold. In 1934, a courtroom in New York became the center of national attention. The private fallout of the Vanderbilt dynasty erupted into public spectacle. Newspapers called it the trial of the century. At stake was custody of 10-year-old Gloria Vanderbilt, the last living link to Reginald's vanished fortune. The contest pitted her mother, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, against Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, Reginald's formidable sister, a sculptor and patron who had built her own legacy apart from the family scandals. Day after day, reporters packed the benches, sketch artists captured every glance, and headlines blared accusations of neglect, extravagance, and moral unfitness. Testimony spilled out details of lavish spending, Parisian nightclubs, and whispered rumors about Gloria Morgan's private life. Gertrude, by contrast, projected stability and tradition, arguing that only she could offer the child a proper home. The trial's intensity made the Vanderbilt name a byword for both privilege and dysfunction, exposing the cost of Reginald's choices to the harshest possible light. Behind the legal arguments, the real story was the unraveling of a dynasty, its secrets, its loyalties, and the child caught in the crossfire. As the world watched every moment unfold, Across the turn of the 20th century, the foundations beneath families like the Vanderbilts began to shift. Railroads, once the arteries of American growth and the source of the family's fortune, started to lose their grip. New competition, antitrust laws, and the rise of automobiles chipped away at the empire that had once seemed unassailable. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 and later federal regulations brought new scrutiny, squeezing profits and reducing the power of the old railroad barons. By the 1910s, many of the great family fortunes were no longer built on steel and steam, but on banking, insurance, and Wall Street speculation. The world of inherited wealth was changing, and the Vanderbilts, like so many of their peers, struggled to adapt. Economic historians point to this period as a turning point when the old Gilded Age order gave way to a new financial elite. The once mighty railroad shares that filled family portfolios became less reliable, and fortunes that had seemed bottomless started to drain away. As the 1920s roared, easy credit and stock market euphoria replaced the steady dividends of the past. But the illusion of endless prosperity masked deeper instability. By the time Reginald Vanderbilt died in 1925, the warning signs were everywhere: market bubbles, speculative excess, and a growing gulf between old money and the new realities of American capitalism. Within a single generation, the Vanderbilt story shifted from industrial dominance to fragile legacy. The Great Depression, just a few years away, would finish what changing markets had begun, erasing fortunes and exposing the limits of even the grandest names. Reginald's personal unraveling mirrored a broader decline, a dynasty built on rails, overtaken by forces it could no longer control. Even now, American fortunes pass from one generation to the next, often with more assets than answers. Today, inherited wealth remains a proving ground where discipline is scarcer than privilege, and legacies fracture in silence. The ruins of old money echo in courtrooms and tabloids alike, reminding us that fortune without purpose is not a gift, but a test. What would you do if everything was handed to you?